Okay, and the reasons we picked this was all three of us have grown up in the Catholic faith, and one of the things that are kind of annoy some Protestants sometimes, I guess, but we always talk about praying to the saints and how do you get to sainthood, and even the higher level, I guess, is dying for the faith and dying and being a martyr. And so I wanted to focus on that this Monks of Tibhirine as a representative issue around sainthood, martyrs, things like that, because I think it just amazes people. That, it amazes us and amazes all of us that people would die as a martyr. Now, in the Catholic Church, there's the red martyr. Those are the ones who actually uh, shed their blood when they're asked to deny, hurt, whatever their faith. And there's the second one is a white martyr, and that's someone who maybe leads an ascetic life, and devotes that strictly to the faith. And the green one is one who dies giving everything over to Christ. And the fourth one are inadvertent martyrs, I guess I would call it, and people who get killed because of the circumstances that they have. And it's interesting. I read a couple of addendums that people had written about this, and one guy was really impressed that he was just converted to Catholicism, and he said that it was so nice to, have a clear definition or clearer definition of what a martyr really is. So that a lot of people they use that, and that a martyr is anyone who dies for a cause, and the word martyr means witness. And so he said that there's a lot of people who die for a cause, or they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, all sorts of things. And so we toss around martyrdom, and people even say that they're martyrs when things don't go their way. So we're going to go back to a little bit of an Algerian history, and Algeria is the largest country in Africa, and but its big portion of it is consumed by the Sahara Desert, which is really unlivable. But along the coast, Algeria has been a very consequential country along the Mediterranean Sea, and they've been involved for quite a long period of time of uh, being active sailors and traders and all sorts of things up in the Algerian coast. And so they primarily have been a Muslim country, but in 1830s, all the European countries were going very aggressively to look for territories that they could make into colonies, and then change the culture and uh, maybe the business habits and whatnot. And many of them were very sincere, and they thought they were really helping people because they could bring their way of life, so they could teach them English. But in this case, in Algeria, it was to teach French and to teach how because the French believed very much in law and order and certain structures and those kind of things. And so, as many as 500,000 Frenchmen relocated to live in Algeria and the spaces of Algeria, and naturally they brought a couple things. One is the Catholic religion, and then their French religion, and their laws and whatnot, and their structure. But the other thing that in many of these colonial takeovers, I guess, is the right there, is they also kind of established themselves as maybe being superior to these poor people they don't know any better. They don't know how to live like a Frenchman and whatnot. So from about 1830 to maybe 1954, the French controlled the country, and a lot of Catholics were born there. But during World War II, which few years before that, the French had a deeply divided government. The Republic had fallen, and they didn't know, was it the Vichy French or the, de Gaulle's people and whatnot. And so, what do you do with all their colonies? They had colonies all over the world, like Vietnam, which we got involved in, pretty heavy. But in Algeria, this is in 1952, the people became very unhappy. They wanted independence, and independence was a very common theme throughout the world. The India in 1948, and everybody wanted to have their own country and not be bothered and practice their own religion and whatnot. And so in 1962, 63 time period, the French pulled out and turned the government over to the locals, and but it was very difficult as in most of these cases, who in the local groups are going to take over, how are they going to rule. It's one thing when a European power came in there and they would use violence or whatever they're going to need to keep the money going and keep the culture going. So anyway, so 1962, 63, they began this turnover, and there were a lot of different people. There are lots of things we could share. I want to move the clock forward to 1993, which is really a critical year. A group wanted to make it's called the GIA. They wanted to make the Algerian state more Muslim and all, have basically they said by the end of 1993, I want all the Europeans out of the country so we can make this a ideal Islamic state, and Islamic people run it, and that the cultures that the French and some of the other nations like the Spanish were detrimental and contrary to their religion. Some were sincere about the religion part, others just wanted power. As we got to the end of 93, there was a lot of instances where martyrs were created, as we call it, in this thing. And it was pointed out that there was like 19 martyrs that they were brothers and priests and nuns, were brutally murdered, shot in the street, shot in churches and all sorts of things. And it scared everybody because there was a lot more than that. And the one that the book focuses in on are 7 monks who were in a monastery, or actually 9 months, because they were there in Tibhirine, which was kind of a rural community. And they were there helping people. They had a clinic they had set up. They had teaching a little school. They had, agricultural, and they were helping bring in new agricultural techniques to the locals. And the locals, they had a very good relationship locally, but all of a sudden this revolution, happened, and one of the groups wanted them out, and other groups used them as a symbol that we could really make a lot of progress if we could get these guys out of here. That probably wasn't true. Some of them didn't, just wanted them as a symbol to really solidify their power. Now, in a lot of situations, we're happy, this is 93, but here's in 2026. It's still going on, and in a lot of different places in Africa, but a lot of other countries in Asia and Latin America and all over, where the strongman comes in and wants to really go after the peacemakers. And these definitely, the people that were there were definitely peacemakers, and they were, a form of Catholicism, which I just really admire, giving everything to Christ and whatnot. And so the thing I wanted to focus in on was what they went through to get to this point. What they went through as far as their giving their whole life into to Christ, and eventually dying for their beliefs and religions. They were arrested the following year in March, and then found their bodies beheaded and discovered in May by one of the rebel groups, and they were through the period where they were offered as hostages so that they would, they could get money or something like that for the local group. So I found the book and the story very moving, mainly because, I keep asking myself, and I've asked since I've been a little boy, could I have done that? Would I have faced, murders like that? And what would I have done? My natural instinct, I look at it and I would answer it today. And I guess I want to answer that for you guys too. How do you feel about that? I would have fought back. I would have used violence to have violence, get guns. They didn't have any guns. I would say, hey, we're doing all this good here. Stay away. We're going to shoot you. But that's not the many Christians, many Catholics believe that. So I know, Herb, you went to Latin America and saw a lot of places where martyrs were made, pretty much the same kind of a scenario. And I'm sure you reflected on that. And Marty, I know that we've talked to you in the past about that too. But and he asked the question: was it worth it? And would it have been better if they would have lived and maybe moved to another community which was more peaceful, or that was better defended, or whatnot? And I remember the nuns in our school talking about the great martyrs and people who have done these great things, not only in violence but all four categories. Like Brother Damien going into Hawaii and working with the lepers, and Maria Goretti.
Maria Goretti was from Italy. She was only 12 years old, and she resisted being raped by a neighbor, and he stabbed her and killed her that way. So she was canonized a saint. Each of these martyrs that I saw, each of them had their own wrestle with should they die as martyr or not, So they had opportunities to escape, but they decided not to. And they decided to stay with their people, So every martyr is different, and they all have different motivations,
I should say that the revolution part sort of happened in a way that's familiar, so that you might think about how in Egypt, after the Arab Spring, they had democratic elections, and they democratically elected members of the Muslim Brotherhood, and then the military or somebody decided that wasn't acceptable, and so they decided to, suppress that result and take matters into their own hands and become a government in that way. Something very similar happened in Algeria, where members of a somewhat more lenient group, a little bit more radical, I suppose, than the government they had. The government that they had was extremely what they would consider accommodationalist with the French or whatever. They thought the French were really calling the shots a lot of times. As a matter of fact, when the kidnappers were negotiating, they wanted to negotiate with the French. They didn't even want to negotiate with the Algerian government because they didn't respect them enough, because they thought, well, it's really the French who's calling the shots anyways. It was kind of a slap in the face. 91 elections in Algeria brought in this kind of opposition group to the Algerian government at the time. Many members from the Islamic Salvation Front. In the book, it's abbreviated FIS, FIS, because of the French way in which those words appear or whatever. And then there was a reaction against it. So it was the results of that election were suppressed. So you can see how people then start feeling like their democratic voice or whatever doesn't really count, that the French are still basically there calling the shots and controlling things or whatever. And from our perspective, if you think back again to the Egyptian situation, it was just kind of like, wow, they had this revolution, and then now they're going to bring in the Muslim Brotherhood. This is this is a disaster. But they were democratically elected. So what do you do when somebody is democratically elected and their ideas of governments is to undo democracy, to become illiberal or whatever? And that was the exact same situation in Algeria. So the Algerian government and the French were just like, we can't let this group in there. And so then, upon seeing that, they were being, disallowed or disbarred from, the government, even after they had been democratically elected, and there was like a lot of assassinations and all kinds of stuff like that. Again, kind of reminiscent of in Iran, when there was a democratically elected a guy who was elected against the Shah and his family, and the CIA came in there and assassinated him to make sure that he couldn't take power, at least partially because it was the Cold War and he was talking commie talk. So he was talking about nationalizing the oil and stuff like that in Iran, and wound up being the exact same thing where this fundamentalist group winds up being able to take over because of the incredible unpopularity of the government, and the sense that the government that they had was being propped up by the West in general, and was the West that was calling the shots. They didn't have their own government. And it was sort of like this question becomes like, oh, do we let people, if they choose it, be ruled by totalitarians? And not just that, but ruled by Islamic or theocratic totalitarians. But part of the way that the book really depicts this gets going is it's like, it was very easy to convince people that the reason why things weren't going well for them was because they had fallen away from true Islam and they weren't practicing it. So they needed to become more rigorous about the way they practiced Islam. And so another group came up in Algeria called, Dad already mentioned it, but the GIA, and they were more radical than even the FIS was, and they fought with the FIS. And they also obviously fought with the Algerian government. So you never know who was killing who. And then and this is like, again, very, very common. We saw it in Afghanistan. It was like really hard to even know who was in control of the GIA. There were so many different subgroups and generals who, were able to come into power because of this situation where the FIS hadn't been allowed to take the seats in government that they had been elected to. And so it was like really easy to like get the sympathy of the people. But the GIA really did, certain factions of it renounced violence, and other factions of it thought it was a good way to fight back or to get power or whatever. And so again, theologically speaking, they had to do all kinds of things with the Quran and with Islam, and issue fatwas and these kinds of things. But like what is done with this scholarship is, you could say it's not in the Quran really, as it was for many people. That's not my idea of what it means to be a Muslim. Or other people would say, no, this is, true Islam or whatever. You get the same kind of divisions and arguments within the religion as you do in any religion. There's so many different factions, so many different ways to interpret things. And those who wanted to, find ways to use violence and have it be justified Quranically, they could do it. Just like Christians did the same thing with, Christian theology when they want to justify violence as well. It was sort of funny to me that a lot of the folks in the FIS or whatever were actually looking to the Augustine of Hippo, who was native to Algeria, and looking at his just war theory, even though he was a Christian, and trying to figure out like how they could fight this war as they saw it against this accommodationalist government, this puppet government from the French, in a just manner. And so when you see these documents that they came up with, they're full of Quranic thought and teachings in law. But the mistake that gets made sometimes in the West, we seem like, oh, well, these guys are saying this is the true Islam, so this is what Islam is. It's a violent religion. But that's not true at all. There was only this interpretation, this very specific interpretation of Islam is violent, and so that it is, and it was newly minted theology in order to wage this war in Algeria. And then what was interesting to me, just as a person who's basically interested in theology, and this has to do with why we consider these monks martyrs, is like, how did they articulate why they stayed? And so the situation was just growing out of control. It was dangerous. Westerners have been told to leave, but they didn't. So, what's the thing? Were they just trying to stick their thumb in the eye of these, violent militants or whatever? In what sense did they think they were protecting the village that they were in? As you said, it was a very small village. I think 750 people at the time. And so, like, in what sense were they, bearing witness to their Christianity by staying rather than leaving? They were not serving any Christians. They only served a Muslim population. And so, there was a couple of significant guys, I guess we can talk about, but I guess the main theologian of the group, the main spokesperson of the group was Christian. I guess his full name was Dom Christian De Cherge or something. But anyways, these guys all have incredible stories, by the way. And the book really, these guys were not, dolts. These guys were just unbelievable, thoughtful theologians, including a doctor, Brother Luke, who was a part of the group as well, and was probably the main reason, really, why the abbey there was such a important resource for the community. Was that he would see patients all day long, and if they left, that there wouldn't be, there would no longer be any kind of medical care like that in the community. But I just was fascinated by the way Christians concern, and I really related to some of this. Obviously, my situation was nowhere near extreme, but I did a project called Muslim Christian Dialogue, where we got together with Muslims. We have a large Muslim population here in Columbus, and we dialogued, and like, what do you talk about, and all that kind of stuff. But like, it was interesting just knowing too about some of the history of the Catholic Church's interactions with Islam, and some of the teachings about Islam within the Catholic Church and that kind of stuff. Just watching Christian having to articulate theologically in a way that was acceptable, a way that allowed him to remain within the Catholic Church, what they were doing there and why they stayed, and what is the point of a mission to Muslims, to a totally Muslim population. And it was not, interestingly, it was not proselytization, although that's that's one of the reasons why they were kidnapped. There were those in the GIA who believed that they were converting Muslims. It wasn't true, but there were those who believed that they were converting them, and so that they were, they were heretics and needed to be removed. It's important to remember, though, by and large, Algerians, Muslims, Algeria's Islamicists, as well as the Berber communities and all that, like, they were totally abhorrent. This kidnapping was a big turning point for the whole country. Like, they really, 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 thought it was over the line. They were against it, and it really made the GIA fall apart in a certain way. And the guys who carried it out were dead within a year of carrying this out. So
Yeah, and one of the things that the French did when they tried different things to have a real good relationship in France. In fact, what they did was they made a whole department, an Algerian department. It was Algerian representatives in Paris. But back to Christian, and back to the thing that I found most interesting is all these guys got together, and he said, "Well, what should we do? Should we stay here or should we go?" And it was kind of his question. And I told the people we're not leaving. And I went, and he met with a chief government guy, and the other guys looked around and said, "Oh, wait a minute, let's talk this out." because two of the guys initially wanted to go back home, and they had things they could do that were alternatives. There was guys who were college professors in there, and they were changing and whatnot. And I just found the dynamic very interesting. And Christian said, "Oh yeah, I didn't want to force this down, but I was in a situation where I was with a leader, and he was trying to persuade us to go, and I said, this was not legitimate." And so they went around the table, which I thought was really interesting, and I think it's a good way. And each one professed what they were concerned with, and they were very nervous because a couple of them said, "I don't want to die." I don't. If we stay here, we're going to die. And then others kind of said, like that Luke, the doctor, he said, "If I leave, he was very old and sickly, but if I leave, these guys are really going to be in big trouble. And we do provide a lot of value." So they even knew some people in the 150 that you mentioned, Marty, that lived in the town, who had relatives and friends in that movement who really respected them for staying there and feeding the people and participating and trying to become more like the Algerians in some ways. So it was rather ironic when some of the same guys showed up to kidnap them and kill them. I don't know
I
if
just
they.
wanted to mention that it was Christian. Christian kind of he was a bit dictatorial, even though he did back down. I mean, the first thing he did, without consulting any of the other brothers, was tell the military, the government military, that he didn't want them there to protect them. Which, so back to your point, Dad, about how you would have handled it. You would. I mean, who knows, but most people would have said, yeah, we want military protection, like we're in danger, whatever, we want to continue our mission, stay here. But he said he decided for the whole group, and that was the first big controversy. Like, what are you doing making these decisions even though you're technically the abbot or whatever, without even asking us? You just put us in this situation. And then he does it again the second time when he goes
Yeah, I know.
to meet
Yeah.
with the Algerian politician that you're talking about, who's telling him to leave. And he says, yeah, just, no, we're not going, even though they hadn't decided yet, even though they had been talking about it. Although he might have said, we haven't decided yet or whatever, but I mean, the implication was the same. And so the question just becomes what are you doing? What are you trying to prove? And this is after too, I should say, many of the other martyrs had already been made. Many of nuns shot in the back, who had been, giving
Yeah,
childcare
two of
and
them were going to mass, and in the
yeah.
evening, and somebody just got out of their car and just shot him right
Yeah,
there.
so it was very
Right
clear
outside
that it was not a good. They were not, and they had already been visited by what they called almost facetiously the Brothers of the Mountain, who were the armed GIA groups that were basically just roving around terrorizing people. And again, the important thing is to remember that most of the people, by far, as always in these things, who were assassinated were Muslims, like tons of Muslims.
Yeah,
Were murdered by these guys. So I mean that's the majority of people that suffered and died under when things break down like this.
So how did they decide to stay? Did they all then agree to stay?
Yeah, they did. They all went around, took a vote, and
eventually. Yeah.
yeah. At the very end, it was a choice that they all independently made. But again, Christian was very persuasive, and Christian had done a lot of theology and convincing, and he had written a giant treatise and a testimony that really stands to this day as this document about Muslim Christian relations. So
Right, and they had all sorts of. They tried to learn each other's language, and he read the Quran and tried to see what commonalities there were, and all sorts of things. And if you grow up in a very insular society, that's the one you hear. And I'm not just talking about Islam. In a lot of ways, with Catholics too.
Well, when the Pope went to visit, he visited the town of Hippo, where the Christians were. So originally it was a Christian area, which is called Annabelle now. And he also visited the 19 martyrs during the Algerian War, And so
Those
he
were
paid.
just French martyrs, like Marty said. There's like 150 Islam martyrs too, trying to stop it.
Yeah. So
But what do
Yeah.
they when they go there and pray, like the Pope and whatnot? What do they pray for? Do they pray for conversions? Do they pray for peace? Do they pray for understanding? Do they pray for what? What? How does the Pope address that?
well, the Pope prays for peace, and that whatever is done not non-violently, and they pray for dialogue and good relationships, but they don't necessarily pray for conversions,
There's also emphasized in the book that, so again, Islam is diverse, just as Christianity is. So there's people who do, even somebody who was coming to my school where I teach as a volunteer from a Baptist church was saying like, I guess I used a dirty word around him, which was social justice. I said, oh, something like, oh, you're here for social justice concerns, and that's become a bad word for certain Christians in the United States because it seems like you're a lefty or something like that. But anyways, he denied it. He was there for social justice. He said, yeah, we do this, but we're not against proselytizing. And I said, well, this is a public school. You can't proselytize here. And most of our students are, not Baptist for sure. There's a lot of Catholics and there's a lot of Muslims and whatnot. So just to say that there's a lot of diversity of opinions on these things. But interestingly, in Islam and all my Islam friends and during the Muslim Christian dialogue, we had to agree that nobody was trying to convert anybody. It was just for understanding between the two groups so that nobody would go on any kind of off on something about if you believe this or that you're going to burn in hell eternally or whatever, you know what I mean? Like you couldn't do that. It was just to help people to understand. But one of the things that came up is that, and it's also in the book as well, is that Muhammad very famously said that the people of the book don't need to be converted, and the people of the book are Christians and Jews. The people that came before, they're already they're already practicing Islam in a sense. There's this really general definition of Islam that just means submission to God, and so for in their way of looking at it, Moses and Noah and whoever were all Muslims because they all submitted to the one true God or whatever. And so but there's of course ambiguity around that. There are other people that in the Islamic community that do think Christians need to convert. John Paul II put out an interesting one, and I'll just summarize it very simply. He just said, Islam is true in as much as it overlaps with, our understanding of the Bible. There are instances in the Quran that are based on, biblical things, and where they don't vary from our tradition, they're correct or they're true. But where they do, then that's a kind of falling away, which again is kind of interesting because within Islam, they think of the Bible before the Quran as having fallen into corruption. So just to give a really quick example, let's say Abraham going through Egypt and having to take Sarah and pretend it's his sister so that things will go well with him in Egypt or whatever. That's a very scandalous episode in Genesis, or Genesis, and in Islam, that part's cut out. So you still have the story of him traveling with Sarah, but there's no he offered his sister to Pharaoh or whatever. So from an Islamic perspective, they feel like somehow our Bible became corrupt. There's no way that Abraham would have done something like that. So that it developed all this corruption. So they basically, just to say that from an Islamic perspective, they feel the same way as what John Paul articulated, but just in reverse. So whereas John Paul says, in whatever ways it varies, that's incorrect. And in whatever ways it varies, for the Islamicist, that's incorrect. So that story where Abraham wouldn't do something like that. And of course, the biggest divisor is that, Jesus, Mary, they're all important people in Islam. It's just that, Mary was not a mother of God and Jesus was not a God, and that kind of stuff. So that's that's where, it's cool to, tell stories about Jesus and his teachings, but all that stuff in the Bible from their perspective, in which he, is seen as or proclaims himself to be, the Savior or the Son of God. That's the fallen stuff. That's the wrong stuff. And in some versions of Islam, that's the stuff that is going to get us condemned to hell, because we believe, in more than one God. But so this is the way these kind of arguments go. I was just so intrigued by the way Christian kind of had to run through the line, and he had to say this really interesting thing. He said, "I am doing my Christian job. I am doing my Christian duty," because he had to justify it by serving Muslims without trying to convert them, because they are, in some sense, a part of my. He didn't actually go as far as to say Christian family, but just my family, like the people of I guess you could say the Judeo Christian Abrahamic tradition, where we all have the same, figure in Abraham, these kinds of things that people talk about, progenitor and Abraham or whatever. So he had to do in his theology was way more sophisticated than that. I'm just totally summarizing it really easily, but like, so anyway, so he was his dying, his witness was for the one same God as the Muslims were dying for. So yeah.
When you go there, is it better to continue living, and then become a martyr? Would they have been smarter just to say,
Yeah, yeah.
we're going to try to figure out a different way to help these guys, and not
Or come
necessarily,
back when it cools down or something like that. Yeah.
yeah, and say, we're going to go to another town which we can live in, and we'll invite all the 150 people to come,
750. Yeah.
yeah, and have them come with us or something like that, is to work on. I mean, just you can do good, but do you have to be a martyr to really prove it? I know that we praise all these guys who actually give their lives, but
Mhm.
I would have probably wanted just to go to another parish. I mean, there's a lot of people who need to be helped and stuff.
Yeah, those are hard decisions to make. Stanley Rother, he was a missionary in Guatemala, and he was on the death list. So he left and went back to Oklahoma. And then he stayed here for a while, for a few months. But he said, no, my place is really with my people. And he went back to Guatemala, knowing that he could get killed. And he was martyred in his rectory when he tried to resist, but they killed him anyway. So each of those, that was his decision, But the bishop and others would tell them, you don't have to go back, But,
Yeah, because you can become a leader of our church here in Oklahoma.
Yeah. So each of those martyrs had to make the decision for themselves,
Mhm.
even though other people were telling them not to go back.
Well, Herb, you went on that. I was referencing a little bit earlier, but it was a tour that you
Yes.
visited, like 6 different places or something like that, where martyrs were killed in Latin
Right,
America.
right.
What places did you go to?
Well, we said
Nicaragua,
mass. Well, in El Salvador, the bishop was killed while he was saying mass, Archbishop
Romero.
Romero.
Yep.
Yeah.
Movie
And we
about
were,
him and a book. Yeah.
and then we were in Guatemala, where Stanley Rother was a missionary from Oklahoma, and he was killed in his rectory. We went to the place where the 3 nuns were killed in El Salvador. And we went to another place where a bishop in his garage had released a study about Guatemala, and he was uh, hit with a brick and killed in his garage. So there were different instances in different ways that they all became martyrs, So
Yeah, and notice each one of those cases you just said, it's very tricky on how did they relate to the governments that were there, were they just like in Latin America, a lot of times they became very associated with the power people and the rich and the elite, and then in other places they worked against the government just to help poor people who they were worried
A lot
that
of
they would.
times it was both. It depended. Yeah, there were
Yeah, and so
those
the Catholic Church was in the middle of all these
in the same place at
controversies,
the same time. Yeah, just different
which
priests doing different things, basically.
which is
Yeah,
another answer to my question: is wouldn't it be better if they would have done other things? Well, those other things aren't that easy to do either, and to become
yeah,
things and try to avoid it.
yeah. Pope Francis was famously criticized, and I think unfairly, but nonetheless for not standing up for some of the martyrs, especially the Jesuit martyrs in Argentina, like as if he could have intervened. I don't think he could have. But there is always this question about like how complicit is the church with the violence going on, and there's going to be members of the church who are not complicit at all, who are there with the famous theology called liberation theology, that are adhering to that liberation theology, and so they're with the poor. And then there are those that are part of the establishment, and there's just totally no one unified thing at all. One of the big controversies in the book was, did Christian really like persuade these guys to do something kind of like just by the force of his personality, and did he in some way get them killed? Because there were, it made it very clear that they were not all on his mission, at least in the beginning. That many of them were there to live out their Christian life, in a contemplative way. And I should mention about the Trappists. So there was a whole really interesting, twice in the book, slightly different histories of monastic living, starting with the rule of Saint Benedict. And so this is Trappists were like, the word's not unreformed, but after Vatican II, a number of the monastic organizations were, I don't know, they liberalized a little bit. They chilled out a little bit, I guess you could say. But the Trappists stayed extremely hardcore. And so that there was vows of poverty, vows of obedience, vows of silence, vows of celibacy, but also a vow of a geographic vow, where you really weren't
stability.
allowed to leave. Yeah,
No, they had a vow of stability. So
stability. That's the word I was looking for. Thank you. Yes.
yeah,
And so like they were, they were all kind of very extreme guys in a way. And it's important to mention too, coming from France, that they really were not supported in what they were doing. I mean, they did come to be, but they were not initially at all. None of their families was thrilled about it, because it's almost like from a family's perspective, it's a slap in your face two different ways. One, these guys were pretty well educated. Again, Luke was a doctor who was actually sought after in France, according to the book. At any rate, they were calling him back to like become, more active in France as a doctor. Christian's family was not happy about his decisions, and a lot of the guys who were there. Like, I mean, in the book, Christoph really stood out to me as somebody who had wanted this very simple life, did not want to be involved in politics at all, and he wound up being a martyr. And the question, I guess, at least not explicitly stated by the book, but implicitly stated by the book, is, man, did he kind of push? Michelle was another one who wasn't big into this. Bruno didn't seem to have this special mission to Muslims or anything like that. But many of them did. So Celestine for sure, and Paul for sure, were there in the first place, not just because it was isolated in solitude and simple life, which is like the ideal of the Trappist, but like they were there specifically because they believed in this mission to the Muslim community that was not, again, not about conversion. Like those guys were very clear on that. Of the especially Celestine and Paul for sure.
A lot of the other monks stayed because they just gave over to the authority of Christian, being the leader and whatnot.
Yeah.
And he's a good guy. He'll take care of us. He'll figure something out. He'll keep us away. And so a couple of people didn't care as much. They cared, but they just had this ultimate trust. And that's one of the other things that you see in in the church type of a structure is, they listen to a lot more to their leaders and don't challenge them as much. And that was why it was kind of surprising to see them sit around a table and talk about very openly about, one guy's talked about going back and seeing his family and, leave. And then he said he felt more comfortable to go back to Algeria, to the mission and whatnot. Because in the church, you follow the Pope, you follow, the hierarchy, those kind of things. And I think some of those guys just kind of gave over their right to choose, so to speak. And that's, I think, even though
or else they were actually convinced.
That's kind of like, oh, don't worry, God will turn it all right. Everything will, he'll figure this out for us. And then they're dead. So you wonder, maybe, because have you inspired more people to have a little more courage to stand up for your faith because you died a martyr? And so all of a sudden here we are in 2026, three guys talking about martyrs from back in the 90s, and fascinated by their decisions they're making and dragging consciousness into people, years later.
Or I didn't forget is the book was really clear on two other things I forgot to mention. One is that all the torture and terror techniques that the GIA was using, many of them the older generation had, I guess, apparently suffered during the French counter, repression of Algerian independence. So like a lot of that stuff had been introduced to them via the French. And the other thing that John Kiser spends the whole last chapter talking about Abdul Qadir, who was a Muslim who was from Algeria, 19th century, and was actually in Damascus running away from the French when he, I guess, saved a number of Christians in Damascus from massacre at that time. I don't know the ins and outs of that. It was explained in the book, but I forgot a lot of the details, frankly. But I just wanted to mention that those two factors were also a part of the book, maybe a part of people's considerations as well. Actually, the reason why Christian, right or wrong, sent away the government troops, he thought it would make him even more of a mark to have, and again, it wouldn't, you wouldn't have this nonviolent witness as a part of the mission at all. But like he told them they had to leave. And then he did the very controversial thing, which is really crazy too to think about, is like when the so-called Brothers of the Mountains, when GIA soldiers were injured, they treated them at the monastery. Luke treated them. Luke said, this was his theological stance on it. When somebody is dying or injured or suffering, they're no longer a combatant. They're they're just at the mercy of God. So he was,
and Luke was short of medicine and stuff like that. So he was really worried that if he take and treats these soldiers who aren't necessarily local, he couldn't treat the people coming to his clinic. So it was a tough situation for him, and he was trying to get more supplies and things like that. And we heard so many stories about this. That was every morning you'd have a religion class and you'd talk about, martyrs a lot of times, and who haven't been around for thousands of years, and and they would hold them up and say, "Look at what this guy did, this gal." A lot of females too. I know when I went to visit Herb's Rectory, I remember, and over at this place, he had nice posters of all the saints that he admired the most, and he would take them to the schools and tell stories to the kids about different posters that you had.
Right. Today is the feast of Our Lady of Fatima too.
Right.
So it's about 3 children. 2 of them are canonized saints, Jacinta and Francisco.
Uh-huh.
And Lucia is being investigated for sainthood too.
Yeah, she has one miracle to her church. I think you have to have 2, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And she's got one miracle in the bag, so it'll be a matter of time if she hasn't been. But it's just different in the Catholic tradition, to have saints. And everybody says, "Well, why don't you just pray to God, straight through, and pray to Jesus, and why do you go praying to all these intermediaries and stuff?" And you're not actually praying to them; you're asking them, maybe for guidance and things. And always good to have a little extra help, and maybe these martyrs can help you in some way.
But a lot of it was unresolved. I wouldn't have made the same decision as them. I would have left. But based on the idea of, continue to live and serve, unless somehow you are totally convinced that, which I always think is dangerous. And I think certainty is a little bit problematic sometimes. Well, a lot of times, but unless you are totally convinced, as they were, this was not like there was a part of them that was like, "Oh, God will work it out for us," but it wasn't really like that. It was like, "No, we're going to be martyred." They knew it,
Yeah.
and so it was like, there was no like foolish hope. They understood what the deal was, and so that's perhaps my question. Like what they could have done had they not, died like that. So but like a lot of the examples in South America, those guys chose to stay with the people, and that seems to be like the way that you're martyred nowadays. It's not like the martyrs of old who are, martyred because they won't give obeisance to the emperor or whatever. It has nothing to do with that anymore at all. It's very social justice oriented, and that's the sort of idea around it. It's this witness for peace, and the peace that God gives. And so, but it's a violent witness, because you're sacrificing yourself for that witness. And it's not like it's at your hands for sure. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, like, this is coming. Like, this is a choice. Like, it seems like a lot of these people made, not everybody. But it seems like they're aware of what's going on. And I would not have made that decision. I think I'm more useful to the world than that. When by living is also a sacrifice. I like the Protestant Paul Tillich's phrase, "courage to be," which is to me always meant like, there's a certain courage in continuing on in life, and as long as you can, there's a certain witness to that. There's and again, that's all martyr means in a way, is witness. There's a certain witness to living and continuing to serve in that regard, that is also meaningful to me. So, yeah.
Yeah, good summary, Mart. You were out of time, but
Yeah.
thanks for everybody's thoughts today, and
Well, thank you.
keep working on it.
Okay.
Will do.
Keep
Thank you.
thinking about
Yeah.
it.